I watched my sister Vanessa spin around the Grande Meridian ballroom, her heels clicking against the marble floor I'd spent 6 months securing for my own wedding. The venue coordinator stood beside her with a nervous smile, holding the contract I'd signed 4 months ago. I absolutely love it, Vanessa gushed, trailing her fingers along the silk drapery. It's perfect for June. Jake will be thrilled. Jake, my fiancé, or rather, my former fiancé in a life I'd already lived once before. But Miss Chen, the coordinator said hesitantly, glancing at me where I stood in the doorway, your sister already has this date reserved. I explained that we can't simply. Can't you, though? Vanessa turned to her with that smile, the one that had gotten her everything she'd ever wanted. The one that, in my previous life, had taken my wedding venue, my fiancé, and eventually my will to live. I'm sure my sister would understand. It's not like she needs such an extravagant space. Right, Sophie? Every eye in the room turned to me. The coordinator looked apologetic. My mother, who'd materialized behind Vanessa like a shadow, wore an expression of practiced neutrality that barely concealed her preference. And Vanessa looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes that had always gotten her whatever she wanted. In my first life, I'd said yes. I'd stepped aside like I always had, believing that love would be enough, that Jake would appreciate my sacrifice. I'd moved our wedding to a smaller venue, a garden space that had flooded 2 days before the ceremony due to unexpected rain. Jake had been understanding but distant. The marriage had lasted 3 miserable years before I discovered he'd been having an affair with Vanessa the entire time. But that was before I died at 31 in a car accident that I later learned, in those strange moments between death and rebirth, had been no accident at all. Now, standing in this ballroom for the second time, I felt the weight of knowledge pressing against my chest. I was 25 again, 6 months before my original wedding date, and I knew exactly how this story ended if I followed the same path. So I smiled. Of course, I said softly, and watched Vanessa's face light up with triumph. Take it, Vanessa, I insist. My mother actually looked surprised. She'd probably prepared a whole speech about family sacrifice and thinking of others. Vanessa recovered quickly, rushing over to embrace me. Oh, Sophie, you're the best sister ever. I knew you'd understand. She pulled back, her perfectly manicured hands on my shoulders. Jake and I just feel so right together, you know? When you really love someone, you just know. There it was, the first card laid on the table. In my previous life, I hadn't understood what she meant. I'd been too busy being the good sister, the understanding sister, the sister who always put everyone else first. It had taken me years to realize that Vanessa had been sleeping with Jake since 2 months after he proposed to me. I'm happy for you both, I said, and meant it in a way she'd never understand. I was happy that I could see the snake before it bit me this time. The coordinator looked between us uncertainly. Miss Chen, if you're certain, there would be a cancellation fee and— Send the paperwork to my office, I interrupted. I'll handle it. Your office? Vanessa's expression flickered with something sharp before smoothing back into sweetness. I didn't know your little tutoring business had an office now. There's a lot you don't know about me, I said, and walked out before she could respond. The truth was, in this life, everything was different. I'd woken up on my 23rd birthday, 2 years in the past, gasping in my childhood bedroom with tears streaming down my face and every memory of my future perfectly intact. I knew which stocks would soar. I knew which real estate would multiply in value. I knew exactly what investments would turn my small savings into a substantial portfolio. But more importantly, I knew who had truly loved me all along. I'd met Jake Reynolds in college during my junior year. He'd been charming, ambitious, from a good family, everything my mother had ever wanted for me. When he proposed after graduation, I'd thought I was the luckiest woman alive. What I hadn't known was that he'd initially been dating Vanessa. She was younger than me by 2 years, still in high school when Jake and I met, but they'd apparently had some kind of summer romance before I arrived on the scene. Vanessa had never forgiven me for stealing him, even though I hadn't known he existed until she introduced us at a family dinner. This is Jake, she'd said with barely concealed smugness. My boyfriend. But Jake had looked at me, not her. By the end of the night, he'd asked for my number. 3 months later, Vanessa stopped talking to me. 6 months after that, Jake proposed. I'd thought it was a love story. Looking back with the clarity of death and rebirth, I could see it was a tragedy waiting to unfold because what I hadn't understood then, what I'd been too naive and too desperate for my mother's approval to see, was that Jake Reynolds didn't choose me because he loved me. He chose me because I was the older sister, the more accomplished one, the one with the trust fund from our late grandmother. He chose me because Vanessa was still in high school and couldn't provide the respectable, established partnership his career ambitions required. And Vanessa? Vanessa had spent every moment since plotting to take him back. My first life had been a masterclass in slow destruction. After I gave up the wedding venue, things began to unravel. The garden wedding disaster was just the beginning. Jake grew more distant, more critical. He hated my job as a private tutor, calling it working with children in a tone that made it sound like an insult. He pushed me to take a position at his father's investment firm where I was quietly incompetent and utterly miserable. My mother loved it. Finally, I was living up to my potential, she said. Finally, I was making something of myself. I quit after a year, returning to tutoring, and Jake's disappointment morphed into contempt. I caught him texting someone constantly but believed his explanations. Work stress, a demanding client, his mother's health concerns. The truth came out on our third anniversary when I came home early from a tutoring session to find him and Vanessa in our bed. It's not what it looks like, Jake had said, which was the most absurd sentence ever spoken because it looked exactly like what it was. Vanessa had smiled at me from beneath the sheets. Sorry, Soph, but you know how it is. True love always finds a way. I'd filed for divorce. Jake had fought for the house, the savings, everything we'd built together. My mother had taken his side, saying I was being vindictive and selfish. Vanessa had played the heartbroken other woman, the one who'd loved him first and never stopped. The divorce had cleaned me out financially and emotionally. I'd moved into a small apartment, taken on more tutoring clients to survive, and tried to rebuild a life from ashes. Then came the accident, or rather, the not accident. I'd been driving home from a late session when another car ran a red light and T-boned my driver's side. In those final moments, as metal shrieked and glass shattered, I'd seen the driver's face clearly in my headlights. It was Vanessa. And in the hospital, as my life slipped away, I'd heard the whispers. Jake's insurance policy, the debt from his failed business venture, the life insurance policy he'd forgotten to change after the divorce that still listed me as the beneficiary. They'd tried to kill me for $500,000. But death had given me a gift. A second chance. When I woke up on my 23rd birthday, 2 years before Jake's proposal, I'd spent the first week in a state of shock. Then the shock transformed into clarity. I knew what was coming. I knew every betrayal, every lie, every moment of suffering that awaited me if I followed the same path. So I changed everything. I avoided Jake entirely, turning down Vanessa's invitation to that fateful family dinner. I focused on my tutoring business, using my knowledge of the future to invest wisely and build a proper company. Within 6 months, I'd turned Sophie's Tutoring into Chen Educational Consultancy, a boutique firm that specialized in college preparation and academic coaching. But Vanessa, persistent as ever, had kept pushing Jake into my orbit. Family gatherings, chance meetings, she'd wanted me to see what I'd missed, wanted to dangle him like a prize just out of reach. Except this time, I'd already mourned that relationship. I'd already died for it. So when Jake finally approached me at my mother's birthday party, I'd been polite but distant. And when he'd asked me out, I'd said yes. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see if he was as hollow as my memories suggested. He was. Worse, actually, because now I could see all the red flags my younger self had missed. The way he talked over me, the way he checked his phone constantly, the way he looked at Vanessa when he thought no one was watching. Still, I'd let it progress. I'd accepted his proposal 6 months later, knowing exactly what I was doing, because this time I had a plan. And that plan started with a man I'd barely noticed in my first life. Daniel Chen. Daniel was my second cousin, close enough to attend family events, but distant enough that we'd never been particularly close. In my first life, he'd been a quiet presence at my wedding, had sent a polite gift, and disappeared from my life after the divorce. I'd learned at some point that he'd moved to Singapore for work, building a tech company that would eventually make him very wealthy, but what I'd learned in the moments between death and rebirth, in that strange space where understanding comes without explanation, was that Daniel had been in love with me for years. He'd never said anything because I was with Jake. He'd moved to Singapore not for opportunity, but to escape watching me marry someone else. In this life, armed with foreknowledge and a determination to rewrite my story, I'd reached out to Daniel 6 months after my rebirth. A simple email asking about his work, mentioning I was starting an educational consultancy, and wondered if he had any advice on building a business. His response had been warm, helpful, and surprisingly long. We'd started corresponding regularly. Email became video calls became visits when he came back to the States for holidays. And slowly, carefully, I'd begun to see what I'd been too blind to notice before. Daniel Chen saw me. Not the version of me my mother wanted, not the convenient wife Jake needed, but the actual me. He listened when I talked about educational theory. He valued my work. He never once suggested I should be doing something else, being someone else. And when I told him, months into our renewed friendship, during a late-night call after I'd had too much wine, that I needed to play out a charade with Jake to protect myself from something I couldn't fully explain, he'd simply asked, "What do you need me to do?" That was the moment I knew. In a life full of people who'd taken from me, Daniel was offering to give. No questions, no judgment, just support. "Be patient," I'd said, and be ready to catch me when I jump. Now, standing in the parking lot of the Grand Meridian after giving up my wedding venue, I pulled out my phone and called him. "She took the bait?" Daniel's voice was warm even across the digital connection. "Hook, line, and sinker," I confirmed, leaning against my car. "Vanessa now has my venue, and I guarantee Jake will propose to her within the week. I sure about this?" Positive. I caught myself before saying first life. Daniel didn't know the full truth. No one did. "In my assessment of the situation," I corrected, "Jake's been waiting for an opening. Me stepping aside gives it to him. He'll position it as realizing we weren't right for each other and finding unexpected love with Vanessa. My mother will be scandalized but secretly pleased, and I'll be free." And then I call off my engagement to Jake, citing irreconcilable differences. I'll be the gracious ex-fiancé who wishes them well. And in 6 months, when you come back from Singapore for the holidays, I smiled. Maybe we finally stop pretending we're just friends. There was a pause, then a soft laugh. "Sophie Chen, are you asking me to be your rebound?" "I'm asking you to be my first choice," I said quietly. "The way you should have been all along." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll be on a plane tomorrow." "Daniel, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. I'm coming home." I closed my eyes, feeling something tight in my chest finally loosen. "Okay. Okay," he echoed. "Sophie, thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for waiting," I whispered. Things moved exactly as I'd predicted. 3 days after Vanessa claimed the venue, Jake called me. "Sophie, we need to talk." We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his cup in a way that would have seemed endearing in my first life. Now I just saw the manipulation in it, the practiced vulnerability designed to make me easier to manage. "I don't know how to say this," he began, and I almost laughed because I could recite the entire speech from memory. "You've developed feelings for Vanessa," I said flatly. His eyes widened. "How did you—" "Jake, I'm not blind. The way you look at her, the constant texting, the fact that you were perfectly fine with her taking our wedding venue." I pulled off my engagement ring and set it on the table between us. "I'm not angry. I'm actually grateful." "Grateful?" He looked genuinely confused. You're showing me who you really are before I make the mistake of marrying you. That's a gift. I stood up. I hope you and Vanessa are very happy together. I mean that. I didn't mean it at all, but he didn't need to know that. Sophie, wait. He grabbed my wrist and I looked down at his hand pointedly until he released me. I don't want you to think I'm abandoning you. We can still be friends. I can still help you with your business connections, introduce you to people. No, thank you, I said coldly. I don't need your pity or your networking. I've built my company myself and I'll continue to build it myself. His expression shifted, something ugly flickering across his features. Don't be naive, Sophie. You're going to struggle without me. Without my family's connections, your little tutoring business will stay small. You'll regret this. And there it was, the real Jake. The one who'd emerged slowly in my first life but was already showing himself now that I wasn't playing along. We'll see, I said and walked away. I made it to my car before the shaking started. Not from sadness, I'd already grieved this relationship in another lifetime, but from rage. The audacity of him, treating me like I should be grateful for the scraps of his attention, like I needed him to succeed. My phone buzzed, a text from Daniel. You okay? I'd told him about the meeting. He'd offered to come with me, but I'd needed to do this alone. I'm free, I typed back. Come home. 3 dots appeared, then, already at the airport, see you in 18 hours. My mother's reaction to the broken engagement was predictably theatrical. Sophie, how could you? She stood in my apartment living room like an avenging angel, designer purse clutched like a weapon. Jake Reynolds was the best thing that ever happened to you. Was he? I asked, continuing to sort through paperwork at my desk. Or was he just the most impressive name you could drop at your book club? Her face flushed. Don't be crass. That man comes from an excellent family, has a promising career, and is currently sleeping with your other daughter, I interrupted. Or did you think Vanessa just happened to fall in love with my fiancé? My mother's mouth opened and closed. Vanessa would and did, but it's fine. I'm not interested in fighting over someone who clearly doesn't want to be with me. I finally looked up at her. I'm moving on with my life. I'd appreciate it if you'd respect that. Moving on? She laughed, sharp and bitter. To what? Your tutoring business? Sophie, be realistic. Without a husband from a good family, without connections, you're just going to struggle. I raised you better than this. The words hit exactly where she intended, but they didn't land the way they had in my first life. Then I'd internalized every criticism, every disappointment, every suggestion that I wasn't enough. I'd twisted myself into knots trying to be the daughter she wanted. Now I just felt tired. Mom, I need you to leave. Excuse me? Leave. This is my apartment, my life, and my decision. If you can't support me, then I'd prefer you not be here. I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. Please. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. In my first life, I'd never stood up to her, never contradicted her, never asked her to leave. You're going to regret this, she said quietly, gathering her purse. When you're alone and struggling, don't come crying to me. I won't, I promised, and closed the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. I slid down to sit with my back against the door, hugging my knees to my chest. This was the hardest part, not the breakup with Jake, not the betrayal from Vanessa, but this moment of standing alone against my mother's disappointment. In my first life, I'd never managed it. I'd bent, compromised, sacrificed pieces of myself until there was nothing left. And when I'd finally broken, when I'd finally had nothing left to give, she'd been nowhere to be found. My phone rang. Daniel. Hey, I answered, voice rough. I'm in a cab from the airport, he said. Be there in 30 minutes. Want me to bring dinner? You didn't have to come so soon. Sophie, do you want me to bring dinner? I closed my eyes, feeling tears slip free. Thai food, from that place on Morrison Street. The one with the incredible drunken noodles? That's the one. Done. See you soon. He hung up, and I sat there in the silence, marveling at the difference. In my first life, after the divorce, I'd spent weeks alone in an apartment like this one, and no one had called to check on me. No one had shown up with dinner. No one had asked what I needed. Daniel arrived exactly 30 minutes later, carrying enough Thai food for 4 people and wearing a concerned expression that softened when he saw me. "You look like hell," he said. "Thanks," I muttered, but stood to help him with the bags. "I mean it as a compliment. You're usually so composed." He set the food on my small dining table and turned to look at me properly. "It's good to see you letting yourself feel things." We ate in comfortable silence for a while before Daniel spoke again. "Tell me the plan." I looked up from my pad thai. "Plan? You've got one." "I know you do. You let Vanessa take the venue, you broke up with Jake, and you're clearly bracing for something. So what's the end game?" I set down my fork, considering how much to tell him. The truth about rebirth and foreknowledge and dying in my sister's attempted murder was impossible. But the strategy— "Jake and Vanessa are going to plan a wedding," I said slowly. "They'll use the venue I booked. Probably my vendors, too. They'll play it as a tragic love story. 2 people who couldn't help falling for each other. Star-crossed lovers finally getting their chance." "Okay." "And it's going to be a disaster." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because I didn't just give Vanessa my venue. I gave her my exact wedding date, June 15th. I smiled. "Do you know what happens on June 15th this year?" He shook his head. "The biggest thunderstorm we've had in a decade. The Grand Meridian has a beautiful ballroom, but the backup generator fails during the storm. Power out for 6 hours. The whole event gets canceled." I leaned back in my chair. "I know because it happened to another couple who had that date. It was all over the news I caught myself again. "I read about it. Local news covered the disaster wedding story extensively." "You're saying you gave them a date you knew would be ruined?" "I'm saying I gave them exactly what they asked for." I met his eyes. "I'm not sabotaging anything. I'm just not warning them. If Vanessa had been a real sister, if Jake had been honest with me, maybe I'd mention that June 15th is a risky date this year. But they didn't choose honesty, so neither do I." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "And after their wedding implodes? After their wedding falls apart? After they've spent months planning and thousands of dollars on a venue they can't use? After they've looked like fools in front of everyone?" I paused. "I'll be marrying someone who actually loves me." "Me," Daniel said softly. "If you'll have me." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Sophie, I've been in love with you since we were teenagers. You showed up at Aunt Marie's birthday party in a blue sundress, and you were talking about some book I'd never heard of. And you were so animated and alive in yourself. I've been waiting for you to see me for 10 years. My throat tightened. "I'm sorry I was so blind." "You weren't blind. You were loyal to the wrong people. There's a difference." He squeezed my hand. "But you're seeing clearly now, and that's what matters." The next 3 months were a masterclass in watching karma work in real time. Vanessa and Jake announced their engagement 2 weeks after my breakup with Jake. My mother called it unexpected but beautiful. I called it predictable and declined to attend their engagement party. Daniel moved back from Singapore permanently, taking a position with a tech startup in the city. We started dating officially, dinners, museums, long walks where we talked about everything and nothing. He met my business partners and became a genuine friend to them. I met his colleagues and understood why he was so respected in his field. It was easy, natural. The kind of relationship I hadn't known was possible because I'd spent my first life forcing something that was never meant to work. We kept the relationship quiet initially, not secretive, but private. There was no need to broadcast it, no desire for social media announcements or public displays. We were building something real, something that didn't need external validation. Meanwhile, Vanessa's wedding planning became increasingly chaotic. She called me 3 times asking for vendor recommendations, which I politely declined to provide. She complained constantly to my mother about the stress, the details, how hard it was to plan a wedding in just 6 months. Maybe you should have thought about that before stealing someone else's date, I said once, when my mother tried to guilt me into helping. Sophie, my mother was scandalized. She's your sister. She's a woman who slept with my fiancé and then took my wedding venue. She's not my sister in any meaningful sense of the word. That had ended that conversation. Jake, for his part, seemed to be realizing what he'd gotten himself into. Vanessa was demanding. The venue wasn't quite right. The flowers weren't expensive enough. The guest list needed to be expanded. She wanted a wedding that would be talked about, that would make people forget she was the second Chen sister to marry someone from the Reynolds family. I knew from my first life that Jake's finances were already strained. His father's investment firm was facing difficulties that wouldn't be public for another 6 months. His trust fund was smaller than he'd led people to believe. The wedding Vanessa wanted was going to cost more than they could afford. But that wasn't my problem. My problem, or rather, my joy, was planning a real wedding with someone who actually wanted to marry me. Daniel proposed 3 months after we started dating. We were at the botanical gardens, walking through the rose garden at sunset, and he just stopped in the middle of the path and said, "Marry me." No ring yet, no elaborate setup, just him, looking at me like I was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. "Yes," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. We planned a small ceremony for August, just 2 months after Vanessa's June disaster. The venue was a private estate owned by Daniel's aunt, nothing flashy, but beautiful and meaningful. The guest list was tiny, close friends, extended family who had actually supported us, and notably, not my mother or Vanessa. "You're not inviting your own mother to your wedding?" Daniel's mother, Aunt Wei, asked with concern when she saw the list. "I'm inviting the people who've shown they care about my happiness," I said. "My mother only cares about appearances. There's a difference." Aunt Wei, who had her own complicated history with my mother, just nodded and said, "Fair enough." June 15th arrived with ominous clouds and humidity that felt like a physical weight. I woke up in Daniel's apartment. We'd been living together for a month, and checked my phone to see a string of increasingly frantic texts from Vanessa. "Sophie, the weather is terrible. Did you deal with this when you had this date? Call me ASAP. Need to know about backup plans." Why aren't you answering? This is important. I set the phone down and stretched. Daniel was already up making coffee in the kitchen. "She's panicking," I reported, wrapping my arms around him from behind. "Are you going to help her?" I thought about it. In my first life, I'd helped everyone, even people who'd hurt me. I'd convinced myself that being the bigger person meant swallowing my pain and offering support to those who'd betrayed me. Now, I understood that being the bigger person meant having boundaries. "No," I said. "I'm not." "Good." He turned in my arms and kissed my forehead. "You want to get breakfast out? There's that new place with the incredible omelets." We spent the morning deliberately not thinking about Vanessa's wedding. We had breakfast, walked through the park, browsed a bookstore. It was only when we got back to the apartment around 2 in the afternoon that I finally checked the news. The storm had hit at exactly 1:15 p.m., just as the wedding ceremony was supposed to start. The Grand Meridian's generator had failed as predicted. The ballroom had lost power, plunging 150 guests into darkness. The air conditioning had shut off in 90-degree heat. The electronic doors had locked, trapping people inside until the fire department arrived. It was, according to the local news coverage, a wedding day disaster of epic proportions. My phone had approximately 50 missed calls and twice as many texts. Most from Vanessa, some from my mother, a few from extended family members who'd apparently been at the wedding. Daniel looked over my shoulder at the screen. "You going to answer?" "Eventually," I said. First, I want to read all of these text messages and bask in the schadenfreude. Vanessa's messages descended from panic to fury to something that looked suspiciously like accusation. You knew this would happen. You set me up. You're a spiteful, jealous bitch, and everyone knows it. My mother's messages were somehow worse. Your sister needs you, and you're not answering. This is unconscionable. When did you become so cold? You've changed, Sophie. I don't know who you are anymore. That last one made me laugh out loud. She's right. She doesn't know who I am. Because the person she knew was someone I pretended to be to make her happy. Daniel handed me a glass of wine. To authenticity? To authenticity, I agreed, and we clinked glasses. I called Vanessa back the next day, once I felt emotionally prepared for the conversation. Where were you? She demanded immediately. I needed you. I was busy, I said calmly. Living my life. The wedding was ruined, Sophie. Ruined. The generator failed. People were trapped. It was a complete disaster, and you just ignored me. Yes, I agreed. I did. There was a moment of shocked silence. You're really not going to apologize? For what? Not rescuing you from the consequences of your own choices? No, Vanessa, I'm not going to apologize for that. My own choices? The generator failing wasn't my choice. But taking my wedding date was? Taking my venue was? Sleeping with my fiancé was? You made all those choices, and I'm simply not interested in helping you deal with the outcomes. I paused. How's Jake, by the way? She stopped. Why do you care? Curiosity. I'm guessing he's stressed about the money you lost on the wedding? Another pause, longer this time. How did you know about that? Lucky guess. Vanessa, I'm going to give you some free advice. Jake Reynolds is not who you think he is. He's not the prize you won. He's not going to make you happy. And the sooner you figure that out, the less painful this is going to be. You're just jealous, she spat. You're bitter because he chose me over you. I'm grateful, I corrected. Because his choice freed me to find someone who actually values me. I hope you and Jake work out. I really do. But I'm done being collateral damage in your love story. I hung up before she could respond. My mother called 10 minutes later. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail that I listened to once and then deleted. Sophie, your behavior is unacceptable. Vanessa is family. You don't turn your back on family. I raised you better than this. Call me back so we can discuss your attitude. I didn't call her back. Instead, I called Aunt Wei and asked if the offer to use her estate for our wedding was still available. Of course, she said warmly. I'm honored you want to celebrate there. Thank you. And Aunt Wei, I'm not inviting my mother or Vanessa. I need you to know that up front, in case there's any family drama. Sophie, she said gently, it's your wedding. Invite who you want. Anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me. That's what real family sounded like. Planning my second wedding, or technically first wedding in this timeline, was everything the first one wasn't. There was no drama about venues or dates, no competition over vendor choices, no passive-aggressive comments from my mother about my dress or decorations or guest list. It was just me and Daniel building something together. We chose August 20th, a date that meant nothing, except it gave us enough time to plan properly. The ceremony would be outdoors in Aunt Wei's garden, with a tent reception just in case of weather. The guest list was 70 people, small enough to be intimate, large enough to include everyone who mattered. Daniel's family embraced me immediately. His mother, Aunt Wei, was warm and supportive in a way my own mother had never been. His father offered business advice without being condescending. His siblings treated me like I'd always been part of the family. They really love you, I told Daniel one evening as we worked on seating charts. They love you, he corrected. My mother has been waiting for me to marry you since I was 19 and came home from Aunt Marie's party talking about the brilliant girl who recommended I read Tolstoy. I didn't recommend Tolstoy. I said I was reading Anna Karenina. Same thing to a lovesick teenager. He grinned. I bought the book the next day, read the whole thing. Hated it, but I finished it because you'd said it was important. I laughed, feeling something warm bloom in my chest. You hated Anna Karenina? It's 800 pages of people making terrible decisions. But I read it anyway, because maybe it would give me something to talk to you about next time I saw you. He shook his head. Of course, next time I saw you, you were dating that guy from your economics class, and the time after that, you were engaged to Jake. So my Tolstoy knowledge went unused. I'm sorry, I said softly. Don't be. You're here now. That's what matters. The invitations went out 6 weeks before the wedding. I kept them simple, cream cardstock with elegant script, no elaborate details or fancy wax seals. Just the facts. Sophie Chen and Daniel Chen request the pleasure of your company. My mother called when she didn't receive one. Sophie, I'm assuming this is a mistake. The invitation to your wedding must have been lost in the mail. It wasn't lost, I said. I didn't send you one. Silence, then. Excuse me? You're not invited to my wedding, Mom. Neither is Vanessa. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. I'm marrying the man I love, and I'm doing it surrounded by people who support my happiness. That's not you. Sophie Louise Chen, I am your mother, and you've spent my entire life making it clear that I'm a disappointment, that I'm not successful enough, not accomplished enough, not married to the right man. Well, I'm done trying to be the daughter you want. I'm going to be myself and I'm going to be happy, and you don't get to be part of that. You're going to regret this, she said, voice tight with fury. When you're older, when you need family, you're going to regret burning these bridges. Maybe, I acknowledged, but right now, all I regret is spending so many years trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it freely. I hung up and immediately blocked her number. Then I blocked Vanessa's. Then I went through social media and blocked them there too. Daniel found me sitting on the couch staring at my phone with shaking hands. You okay? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. I just cut off my mother and sister. I should feel bad. But you don't? But I don't. I feel light. Is that terrible? He sat beside me and pulled me against his chest. I think it's healthy. You're protecting yourself from people who hurt you. That's not terrible. That's survival. I stopped, reconsidering. In my experience, family is supposed to be forever. You're supposed to forgive, to keep trying, to never give up. Says who? The people who benefit from you staying in relationships that harm you? Daniel's voice was gentle but firm. Sophie, real family doesn't make you feel small. Real family doesn't steal from you or betray you or demand you sacrifice your happiness for theirs. Real family shows up with Thai food when you're struggling and celebrates your successes without jealousy and respects your boundaries even when it's inconvenient. Like you, I whispered. Like me, he agreed. And like Aunt Wei. And my parents. And your friends from college who've been texting you excited messages about being bridesmaids. That's your real family. I cried then, not from sadness, but from relief. From the sheer, overwhelming weight of realizing that I didn't have to keep carrying people who'd made it clear I was expendable. The weeks leading up to the wedding were blissfully drama-free. My business was thriving. Chen Educational Consultancy had expanded to 3 locations, and we were negotiating a partnership with an international prep school network. Daniel's startup had secured Series B funding and was being written about in tech journals. We were successful, happy, and building a life together. The only blip came 2 weeks before the wedding, when I got a message from an unknown number. Sophie, it's Jake. We need to talk. I showed it to Daniel, who raised an eyebrow. You going to respond? Should I? Do you want to? I thought about it. In my first life, Jake had been the central figure in my destruction. But in this life, He was just a mistake I'd avoided. There was nothing he could say that I needed to hear. No, I decided. I don't think I do. I blocked the number, but Jake, it seemed, wasn't willing to be ignored. 3 days later, he showed up at my office. Sophie, please, just 5 minutes. I looked up from my desk to see him standing in my doorway looking haggard. He'd lost weight and not in a good way. His suit was expensive but rumpled. He looked like a man on the edge. You have 2 minutes, I said coolly. Then I'm calling security. He came in and shut the door behind him. I made a mistake. Yes, you did, several. I mean with Vanessa, with us, He ran a hand through his hair. I should have chosen you, I realize that now. I stared at him, genuinely curious. What exactly prompted this revelation? The fact that Vanessa is more high maintenance than you expected? Or the fact that you're running out of money and you remember I have a trust fund? His face flushed. That's not... I really care about you, Sophie. I always have. No, you haven't. You've cared about what I could do for you. There's a difference. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it. Jake, I'm marrying Daniel Chen in 11 days. I am deeply, genuinely, completely in love with him. And even if I wasn't, even if I was single and lonely and desperate, I still wouldn't take you back because I've learned something important. Being alone is better than being with someone who makes you feel alone. Sophie, 2 minutes are up. Please leave. He left, and I watched him go with a sense of profound satisfaction. In my first life, Jake's departure from my life had been devastating. In this life, it was just closing a door I'd already mentally shut. August 20th dawned clear and beautiful, with a gentle breeze that felt like a blessing. I woke up in Aunt Way's guest room, where I'd spent the night before the wedding, surrounded by my bridesmaids, college friends who'd stayed close, colleagues who'd become genuine friends. Daniel's sister, Lily. You ready for this? Lily asked as she helped me into my dress. More than ready, I said, and meant it. The dress was simpler than the one I'd chosen in my first life. A flowing A-line in ivory silk with delicate lace on the sleeves. I'd picked it in one appointment, knowing immediately it was right. There had been no committee of opinions, no mother's disappointed commentary, no sister's jealous remarks, just me, Lily, and Aunt Way, all agreeing it was perfect. The ceremony was at 4 p.m. when light turned golden. I walked down a path through the garden with my father, my actual father. Not my stepfather, who'd come into the picture when I was 12 and had never quite known what to do with me. My biological father, who I'd reconnected with after the breakup with Jake and who'd cried when I invited him to walk me down the aisle. I'm proud of you, he whispered as we made our way toward Daniel. Not because of any accomplishment or achievement, just proud of who you are. I squeezed his arm, unable to speak through the emotion in my throat. And then I saw Daniel. He was standing at the end of the path in a charcoal gray suit, looking at me like I was the only person in the world. His best man, his brother Marcus, stood beside him grinning. The guests were smiling. Aunt Way was crying happy tears, but all I could see was Daniel and the way his face transformed when he saw me. Like I was everything he'd ever wanted, like I was enough exactly as I was. The ceremony was short and sweet. We'd written our own vows, and when it was my turn to speak, I looked at Daniel and said the truth. I spent a long time thinking I knew what love looked like. I thought it was grand gestures and impressive credentials and meeting other people's expectations. But you taught me that real love is quiet. It's showing up with dinner when someone's had a bad day. It's listening without judgment. It's choosing someone every day, not because you have to, but because you want to. Daniel, you chose me when I couldn't choose myself. You saw me when I was invisible, and every day for the rest of my life, I'm going to choose you back. Daniel's vows were equally simple and devastating. Sophie, I've loved you for 10 years. I loved you when you didn't know I existed. I loved you when you were with someone else. I loved you from halfway around the world, just hoping you were happy, and now I get to love you up close as my partner, my best friend, my wife. I don't need you to be anything other than exactly who you are. You're enough. You've always been enough. We kissed as husband and wife, and the garden erupted in applause. The reception was perfect. Good food, better wine, speeches that made people laugh and cry. Daniel's mother welcomed me to the family officially. My father gave a toast about second chances and finding happiness. Lily told embarrassing stories about Daniel's teenage crush on me that made everyone laugh. I danced with my husband, under string lights as the sun set, feeling more content than I'd ever thought possible. Happy? Daniel murmured into my hair. Deliriously, I confirmed. No regrets? Not a single one. We stayed on the dance floor for 3 more songs, just swaying together, and I thought about my first life. About dying alone in a hospital bed, knowing I'd been betrayed by everyone I'd trusted. About waking up with a second chance and the knowledge to do things differently. This moment, this man, this happiness was what I'd fought for, what I'd died for in a way. Thank you, I whispered. For what? For choosing me first. Daniel pulled back to look at me, his eyes soft. Sophie, I chose you first 10 years ago. I just had to wait for you to choose me back. I'm sorry I took so long. You took exactly as long as you needed to. And now we have the rest of our lives. He kissed me softly. That's more than enough. The aftermath of my wedding was everything Vanessa's wasn't. There were no disasters, no drama, no regrets. Just happiness and the beginning of a real partnership. Word of the wedding reached my mother, of course. She sent a message through a distant cousin. Your mother says congratulations. She hopes you'll reconsider cutting her out of your life. I sent back, thank her for the congratulations. The rest is not up for negotiation. I heard through the family grapevine that Vanessa and Jake had rescheduled their wedding for October. They'd chosen a less expensive venue, scaled back the guest list, and were apparently fighting constantly about money. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles. No vindictive joy, just a distant relief that I wasn't part of that anymore. Daniel and I honeymooned in Japan, 2 weeks of temples and gardens and incredible food. When we came back, we moved into a house we'd bought together, a renovated Victorian with enough room for offices for both of us and plans for future expansion. Kids? Daniel had asked during house hunting. Eventually, I'd said, first, I want to enjoy being married to you. 3 months after the wedding, I got an unexpected email from Vanessa. Sophie, I need to talk to you. It's important. Please. I deleted it without responding. A week later, she showed up at my house. Daniel answered the door, took one look at her, and said, She doesn't want to see you. Please, Vanessa said, and she looked genuinely distressed. Just 5 minutes. I'll leave if she wants me to, but please, just ask her. Daniel came to find me in my office. Vanessa's here, says it's important. Want me to send her away? I thought about it. Curiosity won. 5 minutes, I said. You stay in the room. Daniel nodded and went to get Vanessa. She came into my office looking thinner than I'd ever seen her, with dark circles under her eyes. Her clothes were still expensive, but there was something diminished about her. She looked defeated. Thank you for seeing me, she said quietly. You have 5 minutes, I said. Use them wisely. She sat down without being invited. I'm leaving Jake. Okay. That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say, Vanessa? Congratulations, I told you so? I don't have any emotional investment in your relationship with Jake. I know. She looked down at her hands. I know I ruined everything between us. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness or your help or anything from you. But I needed to tell you that you were right. About Jake. About all of it. He's not who I thought he was. He's controlling and manipulative and, her voice cracked. He's not a good person, Sophie. And I was so stupid thinking I'd won some kind of prize by taking him from you. You didn't take him from me, I said calmly. You took him from the version of me who didn't know any better. You did me a favor. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. How can you say that? Because it's true. If you hadn't shown me who Jake really was, I might have married him. I might have wasted years of my life with someone who didn't value me. Instead, I married someone who does. I gestured to Daniel, who was leaning against the doorframe. So genuinely, Vanessa, thank you. I don't understand you, she whispered. You should hate me. I don't hate you. I don't really feel anything for you at all. You're just someone I used to know. We're sisters. By blood, maybe. But family is more than biology. Family is people who show up for each other, who support each other, who don't betray each other for a man. I stood up. Your 5 minutes are up. I hope you figure out your life, Vanessa. I really do. But I'm not going to be part of it. Sophie, please. No, whatever you're going to ask for, forgiveness, reconciliation, help, the answer is no. You made your choices. Now live with them. Daniel walked her to the door. I heard their muffled voices, then the sound of the door closing. You okay? Daniel asked, coming back to my office. Yeah, I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. I thought seeing her would bring up all this anger or pain, but I just feel nothing, like she's a stranger. Maybe that's healthy. Maybe. The years that followed were the happiest of my life. Either life. Chen Educational Consultancy expanded internationally. We opened offices in Singapore, Hong Kong, and London. I was featured in educational journals, gave talks at conferences, became known as an expert in my field. Daniel's startup went public. We became wealthy in a way that had nothing to do with trust funds or family connections and everything to do with hard work and smart decisions. We bought a bigger house, had 2 kids, a son and a daughter, built a life that was full and rich and completely our own. I stayed no contact with my mother and Vanessa. It wasn't always easy. There were holidays where I felt their absence, family events where I had to explain why they weren't in my life. But Daniel's family became mine. His mother became the mother I'd always needed. His siblings became my siblings. I heard through cousins that my mother never quite got over being excluded from my life, that she told people I'd changed, become cold, wasn't the daughter she'd raised. She was right. I wasn't the daughter she'd raised. That daughter had died in a car accident at 31, alone and betrayed. The woman I'd become was someone stronger, someone who knew her worth, someone who refused to accept love as conditional. I heard that Vanessa divorced Jake after 2 miserable years, that he'd cheated on her repeatedly, that his business ventures had failed, that they'd lost everything in the divorce, that she'd moved back in with our mother and was working a job she hated. I felt a distant pity, but no desire to reach out. Some people had to learn their lessons the hard way. Jake tried to contact me once more 5 years after my wedding. A message through LinkedIn. Sophie, I know I have no right to ask, but I'm in a difficult position financially. If you could see your way to helping with a small loan, I'd be grateful, for old times' sake. I blocked him without responding. For old times' sake, Daniel said when I told him. Like the old times when he cheated on you with your sister? Or the old times when he said I'd regret leaving him? I laughed. Some people never change. Good thing we did, Daniel said and kissed me. 10 years after my rebirth, I stood in the same botanical garden where Daniel had proposed. We were there for our anniversary, the same date, the same roses, the same sunset light. What are you thinking about? Daniel asked, arm around my waist. I thought about my first life, about dying in that hospital, alone and broken, about waking up with a second chance and the wisdom to use it. I'm thinking about choices, I said. About how one different decision can change everything. Regret any of yours? Not a single one. I looked up at him. You know what the most important choice I made was? What? Believing I deserved better. Everything else came from that. Daniel pulled me closer. You did deserve better. You deserved everything. So did you, I said. Thank you for waiting for me to figure that out. I'd wait 100 lifetimes for you, Sophie Chen. I kissed him there in the rose garden, surrounded by the flowers that had witnessed our beginning, and thought about the gift of second chances. Not everyone got them. Not everyone would know what to do with them if they did. But I'd been given one, and I'd used it to build the life I should have had all along. A life with someone who chose me first, who valued me for exactly who I was, who never once asked me to be smaller or quieter or different to make them comfortable. My phone buzzed, a message from my business partner about a new contract we'd won, another from Daniel's mother about Sunday dinner plans, a third from my daughter's school about an upcoming event. My life was full of people who chose me and who I chose in return. That was the real victory. Not the revenge against those who'd hurt me, but the joy of building something real with people who deserved my love. I looked back at the venue coordinator I'd met in that first scene all those months ago. She'd sent me a message after my wedding, apologizing for the awkward situation with Vanessa. "Don't apologize," I'd written back. "You were just doing your job, and everything worked out exactly as it should have." Because it had. Every betrayal, every moment of pain, every hard choice had led me here, to this garden, this man, this life. I'd let my sister take my wedding venue. And in return, I'd gotten everything that mattered. Not revenge, not vindication, just happiness and the man who'd chosen me first. And that was more than enough.